Our featured speaker tonight, Jason Kotecki, is a professional reminderer and permission granter who moonlights as an artist, author, and speaker. He enjoys Star Wars, soft t-shirts, and brand new tubes of paint. He and his wife, Kim, a former kindergarten teacher who's here with us tonight, have made it their mission in life to help people break free from adultitis, to build better lives, businesses, and teams. Jason works with organizations to beat burnout and become more innovative by breaking the rules that don't exist. You can learn more at escapeadulthood.com. So if you would, please put your hands together and give a warm Dream Bank welcome to Jason Kotecki.
As Jackie said, I wrote a book about rules that don't exist. I talk about rules that don't exist. This book came out last year. We actually had our launch here, which was awesome. And it's this book that covers basically these things that we do because we've always done them, these rules that don't exist. And, things like how you're supposed to not eat dessert first, and how couples are not supposed to swap sides of the bed, things like that. And it's interesting because people might assume that, someone who writes a book about breaking rules is just a natural born hellraiser, rebel. No, that was not me at all. I was shy, scared. I was the only kid in my class in kindergarten to cry on the first day of school. I was afraid of new situations. I was afraid of upsetting my parents or disappointing teachers. I never got sent to the principal's office. I never tried smoking. I never got a tattoo. There was a point in the 90s where I tried to convince my mom to let me get lines shaved in the side of my head, and she didn't go for that, so that was the end of my rebellion. And so I guess the point is, like, even my mom, though, she's like, how did you become a professional speaker? That doesn't make any sense to me how this happened, and it is sort of weird, and I wish there was some sort of magical Hollywood-like story I could tell where I had this blinding flash of light and things changed, but it was really not that. And so, I know people, and you might know people, and there might be people in this audience who are those sort of natural rebellious types. I am inspired by those people, but I can't always learn a lot from them because I'm not like that. And so what has gotten me to where I am now is basically the art of tinkering and practicing this idea that I refer to as like being just brave enough. So this is my daughter Lucy, and she now is a little fish. She loves to swim, she likes to be in the water, but she was afraid, terrified. She had lots of her dad in her. And there was a point where we took a trip to Galveston, Texas, which is where this was taken, and Lucy was playing a game she likes to play called Tricking the Waves. And how Tricking the Waves goes is you get up as close as you can to the water, and then as the tide comes in, you run away without hopefully having the water touch your feet. So she goes back and forth. Well, Kim and I were sitting there, and we were watching her, and we noticed she was actually getting into the water at certain points, which was completely different than a month earlier when we were in Florida. She wanted nothing. She wouldn't even be 10 feet away from the water. And I noticed that what she had been doing, she wasn't jumping into the water yet. She wasn't swimming with the dolphins. But she was being what I like to call being just brave enough. And the idea of just sometimes, there's this great quote from this movie I love called We Bought a Zoo with Matt Damon in it. Some of you might have seen that. But there's the line at the end where he talks about sometimes he's talking to his son. He said sometimes you only need 20 seconds of insane courage. Just literally 20 seconds of embarrassing bravery. And he said, I promise you something good will come of it. I love that quote because it was such a great reminder to me that I don't need to be an adventurous Indiana Jones every single day of my life. 20 seconds of bravery here and there will do. And what that really is, for me, is what I call is tinkering. Because sometimes, in order to make a big change in our life, sometimes we have to do a big, bold thing. We have to jump off the cliff. We have to quit our job, move across the country. But most of the time, we just need to be open to the art of tinkering. So tinker. So we're here to talk about tinker. What is tinker? You look it up in the dictionary. To tinker is to repair, adjust, or work with something in an unskilled or experimental manner. Any guesses what the most important words of that sentence? There are two really important words there. What are they? And experimental, right. Unskilled and experimental. Think about this. When we were kids, we were tinkering all the time. All the time. My daughter Virginia is 2. When she learned how to walk about a year ago, and she let go of that couch for the first time, take those first steps. It will probably not surprise you to know that after she took the first step, she fell. But when she got back up, it will probably also not surprise you to know that she didn't look around and say, oh, you guys are such awesome walkers. You're so talented at walking. I could never hope to be as good at walking as you. I will just let you be the walkers, and I will wait and figure out what I'm good at, and then I'll do that. Like, no, that's ridiculous. When my daughter Lucy learned how to ride her bike, she didn't race around the block her first time. She fell. She skinned her knees. What happened to us? Why, now that we're older, do we think we have to be experts at something on our first try? Why do we think we have to know exactly how something is going to turn out before we even take the first step? We don't. We're afraid of looking foolish, looking silly. People will laugh at us, right? It's ridiculous. We have to remember that just because we might fail at something doesn't make us a failure, right? And so this idea of tinkering is being willing to try things that might not work and being okay with whatever happens. That's really what tinkering is. And because the cool thing is, like, what I found with my comfort zone being impossibly small when I was little is that when I was just brave enough and took one little step, magically my comfort zone got that much bigger and stayed that way for the rest of my life. And then another little step and another little step. And so now I can get to be 40 years old and look back at when I was a kindergartner and say, how did that happen? Amazing things happen when you take small, ordinary, but intentional steps. Tinkering. We always expect like there's going to be some big magical thing, but it's the little things that end up making the biggest difference sometimes. We don't realize how those small things can add up over time and how magical those little moments can be. So traveling is a good example of that. When I was a high schooler, again, you saw my beautiful glasses and my dashing good looks back then. I was looking to be an artist. I wanted to be an artist. And I suspected that there would be, probably I'd have to move to a big city. And at the time, the prospect of traveling scared the heck out of me. I lived in Illinois, small town, pretty sheltered. The farthest I'd ever been was Missouri. And so the idea of being on a plane, I'm like, how could I ever go on a plane? I don't know. How will I know where to go in the airport? How will I know what I'm doing? How will I stay safe? All this stuff. Now that I'm a speaker and I pretty much make a living on planes, it's ridiculous to think about how I was ever scared of that. But it was just this, I didn't magically wake up one day as a travel ninja. It was like you learn little things as you go along. And it's the same thing with traveling with kids. We do a ton of traveling with our kids. Last year, for our book tour, we did about 4,000 miles in a car with 3 kids, 6 and under, which most people are like, that's insanity. And it is. But we had practiced, right? So my daughter Lucy was on 34 flights her first year of life. We took her with us. We didn't like the first day that we went on a road trip was not a 2,000-mile road trip. We did a lot of little ones. And granted, was it perfect and happy all the time? No, there are times where you look forward to the sweet release of a bus crashing into you and just ending it all, right? You're like, that would be a better thing right now. And sometimes you get stuck on a runway with a 1-year-old for an hour and all you have is a cup of water and a straw that you have to entertain her with. Sometimes you're driving to dinner and there's a blowout in the back seat. And you have no choice but to turn back, go to the hotel, and clean out the car seat with a spatula. True story, right? But here's the weird thing, okay? So that literally happened. It was like the worst smell I've ever encountered in my entire life. And we were back at that very same spot just about a year ago. The exact same, we were in Clearwater in Florida. And it was 3 days. We were there for 3 days before we remembered that incident happened. It's the weird thing is when you do things, the difficult things, the hard things kind of like they decrease in value, but the good memories kind of like become even bigger, right? I think that's how women are able to have more than one kid, right? Because in the moment, you're like, this is never happening again to me. I will never do this. And then somehow this magic happens where the bad stuff, the pain kind of dissipates, and then the good things happen. So, traveling, again, it's like kids aren't just, people say, well, you must have great kids because they travel so well. Well, they are good kids, but they weren't born natural travelers. It was a lot of small steps and a lot of experimenting and tinkering along the way. One of the very seminal things that happened to me in the last 5 years, I was in Toronto, and I was speaking up there, and I was dropping off my car at the rental car place, and I'm wheeling my bags through the parking garage at the airport, and I see the Stanley Cup just sitting on this big black trunk, just sitting there. There was a guy, big kind of burly guy standing next to it, SUV. There were two people with their arms around it, getting their picture taken with it. And I was like, it's the Stanley Cup. Oh my gosh. And I'm like, I should get my picture taken with the Stanley Cup. That would be so cool. And then I started having all these thoughts. So I talk about adultitis a lot, like this idea of like, this disease that we get as we get older. And I had all these adultitis thoughts in my head, things like, come on, that can't possibly be the real Stanley Cup. Why would the Stanley Cup be sitting in some parking garage in Toronto? If I go up there and ask to get my picture taken with the Stanley Cup and it's not the Stanley Cup, that is very embarrassing, right? And then at the time, I don't know what the rules are for the Stanley Cup. Like, are regular people allowed to get? I didn't know. Like, now I know, yes, you can, but at the time I didn't. If I go up there and I say, can I get my picture taken? They're like, did you score any goals? No. Right? I'm like, oh, there's too much. So I have all this stuff rolling on in my head, and I have this decision. Do I stop and get my picture taken, or do I keep rolling by? I'll share with you in a little bit what I decided. But I think when it comes to tinkering, we have to be open to doing things that don't matter. That's a good way to start. So for some people, mixing honeycomb and crunch berries is an everyday occurrence. For other people, this is going to end the universe to do this sort of thing, right? But in the grand scheme of things, it doesn't really matter, right? It's a good way to practice for when things do sort of matter. You get kind of, in the zone of tinkering and trying things. A couple years ago, when my daughter was born, Virginia, it was right before Christmas. And probably about February, some of you here in Wisconsin might remember it was that winter that was just super cold for a long time. You couldn't even go out and build a snowman or you'd lose a limb from frostbite. And so we had basically been cooped up in this house for 2 months with 3 kids, 5 and under, and we were going to go crazy. We would have given anything to be in Florida, blowouts and all. Because we were just so desperate to get out of the house, but that wasn't in the cards at the moment. And so what we decided to settle for was going out for lunch. And anyone who has children probably knows that going out to lunch with 3 kids, 5 and under, not a picnic. That's how desperate we were. So it was my job to collect the children and get them ready for public viewing. And I called my son Ben over, and he was in the corner. He had this like purple like smudge under his nose because he was in the corner smelling markers. All right. He was quiet. Don't judge. It was sometimes those 5 minutes are huge. So I was just going to do the whole dad thing, like do that, wipe it off. And Kim, out of nowhere, my wife, she goes, "Huh, he kind of looks like a little tiny Charlie Chaplin, doesn't he?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I guess he does." And then she says, "Why can't parents just draw mustaches on their kids?" And she said it in such a serious tone that I thought it maybe required a serious response. So I said, "Well, I guess because of what other people would think." And as soon as those words came out of my mouth, I knew what I had to do. I said, "Lucy, give me that purple marker." And I got the purple marker and I bent down and I drew this purple mustache on my son, Ben. And I said, "All right, let's go to lunch." And so we did. And he was 2.5. He really didn't know what I had done, so he was just busy being 2. And sometimes we have those moments where in the living room the idea sounds really good, and then as soon as you walk outside and get in the car, you're like, are we really going to do this? And I was nervous that we'd be getting calls from DCFS. We'd be like, we got to get these kids out of this. These parents are unfit for parenthood. But it was, in many ways, sort of the opposite. All right, every single person we ran into smiled, laughed. The waiter, the waitress, or the hostess, the other diners, us. We had a blast watching Ben with this little purple mustache. And it occurred to me, like, here we are in this, like, bitter cold weather. We were just kind of in a grumpy, foul mood. And this one little thing made such a difference for us and all the people around us. And I think that's worth being reminded of, is that sometimes we can get so overwhelmed by the things we can't control, we get paralyzed by it, that we do nothing. But I think the reminder here is that sometimes the little things make the biggest difference of all. And don't ever be afraid of just trying a small thing, and don't ever downplay the amazing things that can come out of those little things. So back to Stanley. Here I am. Here's an opportunity to get a picture with probably the most famous trophy in the entire world. It's pretty much a thing that doesn't matter. Was I going to go for it? I have all these like doubts and weird voices in my head going on, and I could go for it, or I could keep on rolling. What do you think I did?
Go for it.
I love you that you think that. I didn't. I totally chickened out. I know, right? It's like, the worst. So here's what was the worst about it. Not only is it like, you're thinking like, who cares, right? It's the whole concept of like, what did it matter, right? I get into the rental car place, and I see there's a big banner behind the counter. It says, "Welcome to Enterprise, official rental car of the NHL." And then the two people that were getting their picture taken with Stanley came in behind me. They were the employees of the rental car place. So yes, it was the real Stanley Cup. And yes, my opportunity went bye-bye when it got packed up and was already gone. And I was like, what an idiot. Like, what? Why? I was so disappointed that I was walking to the airport and I didn't have a picture of me and Stanley on my phone. Do you know how many people, since I've told this story, how many people come up to me after programs to show me on their phone, them and Stanley? I assume it's an encouragement. I don't know. It doesn't always feel that way. But I'll tell you what, I was determined. One of the things I've learned as a speaker is that anytime something bad happens, it's material. So you can use it later, right? Sometimes it takes a while to get over it. But I was determined I was going to make something good come out of this. So I went into my studio and I made a painting. And I made this painting and I put on it, "Remember Stanley." And I was hoping that the act of creating this would burn this idea into my head, that the next time I was in a situation that I could potentially do something, maybe 20 seconds of embarrassing bravery, right? And go for it. Remember Stanley. So as life happens, I got an opportunity not that long after that. I was in Milwaukee, and I was putting the finishing touches on my book. I was sort of scheduled a long weekend to pull myself up in a hotel room and just kind of like focus on it. And I decided it would be kind of cool. I like writing at coffee shops. I like the buzz, I like the smell. And so I'm on TripAdvisor looking for what's the best coffee shop in Milwaukee. And it was about 20 minutes into it, I realized how ridiculous this exercise was, because I'm not a coffee drinker. Like, why do I care what the best coffee shop in Milwaukee? Who cares? And just anywhere will be fine, right? McDonald's would work. But then I had the thought of like, you're writing a book about rules that don't exist and 20 seconds of bravery. Like, why don't you try coffee? It could be a cool little thing. And I'm like, that is a good idea. Why don't I do that? So I start walking, and of course, the voices start again of adultitis. And you're like, how can there be voices for trying coffee? That's ridiculous, right? It's stuff like this. It's like, okay, buddy, this is ridiculous. You have tried coffee before. You don't like it. You think it's gross. All of a sudden today, you're just magically going to like it. That's like a total waste of money. And coffee, that's like $5. That should be going to your kid's college education. What a way, all this stuff. And luckily, Remember Stanley popped in my head. And the voices stopped. It was like, I'm doing it. This discussion ended, over. I'm doing it. So I get in the coffee shop and I set up my little nest in the corner and I go up to the barista. And I admit I'm a little nervous because I've never done this before. Looking at this board, I don't know what any of it means. I don't know what a Flappuccino is. Are you kidding me? And I'm like, okay, I could do this. So I go to the barista and I'm like, Excuse me, miss. I'm a coffee virgin. I don't know what any of this stuff means. What's a good gateway beverage for someone who's never tried coffee before? Normally I would order a hot chocolate or something. I don't know. She's like, well, if you like hot chocolate, you might like a mocha. I'm like, okay, what's a mocha? She's like, oh, it's like a hot chocolate with coffee in it. All right, well, that doesn't sound too bad. I'll give me one of those. And then you want whipped cream? I was like, whoa, that escalated. Whoa, okay, yeah, sure, I guess I'll get some whipped cream. That sounds good. So I get my mocha, my whipped cream. I'm sitting back in my spots. The moment of truth. Take a sip. Oh, that's good. All right, yeah, that's good. So I put it down, do some typing. Every once in a while, I pick it up. That's good. Okay, this is how people do it. All right, okay, good. And then I get to one point where I pick it up, and it's too light. I finish the whole thing. I'm like, I can't believe this. This has been a rousing success. I'm going to get another one. So I go up to her, and it's the same barista, and I'm like, how you doing? Yeah, I'll take another one of those mochas if you don't mind, and extra whipped cream. That's what I thought I said. I'm not exactly sure if I really said that, because what she said back to me was, do you think we should make it decaf this time, just in case? Which leads me to believe that perhaps what I really said was, you can have one of those mochas. It was so good when I touched my lips. Please just give me, I'll do anything. Just give me one more, please, please. All I know is I had the most productive writing day I've ever had in my entire life, all right? Now, I know what you're thinking. You're all thinking like, oh my gosh, how in the world did you ever find the courage within you to try coffee, sir? Welcome to Earth, by the way, right? I know, like, what is the big deal about trying coffee? Nothing. That's exactly my point. Living a better story, making your life better is not necessarily about jumping out of planes or deep sea diving with great white sharks. It's about finding those little steps just beyond your comfort zone. Whether it's completely not a big deal to anyone else, but for you, is just that on the other side of it. And it's being willing to tinker and try. Now, if I wouldn't have liked the coffee, it wouldn't have been nearly as good of a story, right? But it wouldn't have been a big deal. I'd be like, oh, well, it was worth trying. I would have been happy for trying. Like Mark Twain said, we are always, when we look back on things, we're always so much more regretful of the things we didn't do than the things we did. Because in retrospect, we always like, well, I'm glad I did that. At least I learned something, tried something, maybe something came out of it. Now, in our case, we now have an espresso machine on our kitchen counter. So it worked out for us okay. It's like a thing. And this is the one. You always remember your first. She's beautiful, isn't she? Anodyne Coffee, Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Is it normal to want to have a cigarette after you're done? Is that a normal thing? I don't know. But this was my first coffee. And so like, there's like the big buzzword of innovation these days. Everyone's like, how do we become more innovative and all this stuff? And for some reason, it seems to be the domain of white, rich, millionaire tech guys in Silicon Valley somehow, that they're the ones who are innovative or whatever. But that's not necessarily true. What innovation really is an introduction of a new and better idea, method, or thing. All right? So yes, the iPhone was an amazing innovation. But in my opinion, so is this. You have all that tangle of wires to be like, what if we got a bread clip and wrote where this is the stereo, this is the TV? Like, that's a pretty good idea. So we probably all know this guy, right? Einstein, this E equals MC squared. I'm going to be completely honest with you. I have no idea what that means. All I know is it's kind of a big deal, apparently. All right? Super smart guy. Here's what I love. He said, I have no special talents. I'm only passionately curious. Well, heck, if that's what works for him, anyone can do that. Anybody can be curious. We can all ask questions, right? See what happens. Tinker. Try something. It's really easy to be able to ask ourselves whatever we are. If you're a parent, a manager, employee somewhere, a spouse, what's one thing I could do to make this a little bit better? What's one thing I can do to make my marriage a little bit better? What's one thing I could do to make my parenting a little bit better? What's one thing I can do to make this experience that we provide to our customers just a little bit better? That's being innovative, right? Tinkering is about being innovative. Now, it doesn't always work, right? I don't know if this is any better, but I like the mindset here, right? This is kind of an example of like, what does tinkering look like in real life? What are some questions, all right? Things like, what if I tried something new on the menu? What if I applied for that position? What if I woke up half an hour earlier? What if I stopped watching the news before bed? What would happen if I gave up TV for an entire year? What if I started dating my spouse again? What if I started going to church again? What's something I really need to let go of? What's one thing we can do to have more fun at the office? How can I be a better spouse or partner or friend? What 3 things do I want to teach my kids? What's my perfect day? What small steps can I take to experience my perfect day more often? What are 5 activities that I'm too scared to do? Getting my picture taken with the Stanley Cup, apparently. Who are 5 people I really should reconnect with? Who can I help out today? Where am I failing to think big? Is my planner filled with stuff that really matters? When do I feel most alive? Where do I most want to see change in the world? These are all questions. Questions are the greatest thing. It's a curiosity to spur us into action, which can just be done by tinkering, little, small, baby steps. You know, we live in such a neat, time. And it depends how you look at it. You know, it used to be when you go to college, you get a degree, you could pretty much get a job somewhere, right? Not so much anymore, apparently. However, there are so many opportunities that we don't even realize we're so lucky to have with the tools that are at our fingertips. We could take and give classes to people all over the world through Skype and online communications, just like we're doing right now, right? You can write songs, make art, create movies for free or a fraction of the budget of what it used to be. We sometimes get so caught up in waiting for permission, for someone to give us a job, someone to open a door for us, someone to give us an opportunity, someone to say we're good enough or that we're ready. Sometimes we just have to pick ourselves. Sometimes we just have to start in a direction. One of the things that I started this year, I turned 40 in February, and at the end of every year I have sort of like a review, like it's part business, part personal, where I sit down and think about all the things that went good for the year, or things that didn't go good. And one of the things that came up, I was looking at my notes from the last couple years, one of the things that came up again was the desire to have spent more time in the studio making art. And it's one of those things that, ever since I was little, that's what I want to do, is be an artist. I love to paint, I love to draw, and it's always the thing that gets pushed off my plate because I think I have to do something more important, more business related, more with a higher return on investment. And so it always kind of gets it's an afterthought. And I'm like, I'm just sick of making this an afterthought. And so I decided that what I was going to do was set aside time to make sure that no matter what, at the end of this year, I will not say, I wish I would have spent more time in the studio. So I came up with this concept of a tinker project. And a tinker project is a playful endeavor of any size or scope that gives you permission to experiment with something that's been tugging at your soul without regard to any particular outcome. It's a chance to chase your curiosity, try something new, venture into the unknown, just because, where the act of exploration is reward enough. Too often we have these sort of things, and you can, whether it's tugging at your soul, your heart, you know what I'm talking about, right? It's that thing that's always that whispers, I wish I could do more of that. But there's the rational, grown-up, adultitis-ridden mind that says that's not valuable, that's not important, that's not going to make a difference, that's whatever. And so we don't do it. And so it's this idea of doing it, of giving ourselves permission. So it might look different for everybody. My wife has a pretty good eye for photography. She goes on these walks and she takes pictures with her iPhone. And I don't know, I get credit as the artist in the family, but I gotta tell you, whenever I take a picture of a landscape, it looks crappy. It's like never interesting. And then she comes back from her walk. She's like, oh, I took this picture today. I'm like, oh my gosh, that is amazing. How did you see it that way, right? And so it's like this little creative outlet for her that a Tinker project might be saying, I'm just going to take a picture every single day for the next month, not because I want to become a National Geographic photographer, but just because I just want to do it, right? It might be that I'm going to explore 25 new restaurants in Madison, not because I want to be a famous food blogger or write for the newspaper, but just because I think it would be kind of cool. I want to expand my horizons. It might be I want to write short stories about this robot owl, not because I want to be the next J.K. Rowling, but because I just can't have them stay in my head any longer. They just need to get out, right? It might be that you take a 6-week ballroom dancing class, not because you want to look good at your wedding, but because you just think it would be fun, right? We always seem to have to attach a reason for doing things before we give ourselves permission to do them. The Tinker Project is the opposite of that. It's just saying, I just want to do this, I'm just going to do it. Because here's the thing, a Tinker Project is about trusting that sometimes your heart has reasons for doing things that take a while for your head to understand. That happens to me all the time. There's like things that I feel like this pull to do, and I don't really know why, and then it's afterwards I find out why. So, for 6-7 years, I did a comic strip every day. It's called Kim and Jason. It was about childhood. And I eventually decided that I was going to retire. I was partially getting burned out, partially I wasn't getting the success I wanted. And so there's about a year where I didn't make any art whatsoever. I was just sort of like burned out. I call it very dramatically my fallow period, right? It's very Picasso of me. But it was like, just didn't do anything. But then after a while, I started to have this urge. Like I wanted to start making art again. And I didn't know, it wasn't like, oh, I need to make another comic strip. It was just like, no, I just need to create. And so I gave myself permission to start. Now I didn't call it a Tinker Project at the time, but that's pretty much what it was. It was like, I'm just gonna make stuff and it's not for anything. It's not for my blog, it's not for my speaking, it's just to make stuff. And one of the days that I was making something was when I came up with this art, this penguin. And when I finished it, I told Kim when I got done with it, it was sort of like an out-of-body experience. It just was like, I chose colors I wouldn't normally have chosen. And I'm like, wow, like, this is a good one. Like there's something to this one. Well, it was about a year later, as I was putting art, I would just share it online, make it, share it online, and a book agent happened to see on Facebook from a friend of a friend one of my pieces of art. And she tracked it to my website and found out what we did and fell in love with it and basically sent me an email saying, please let me represent you. Please tell me you don't already have an agent. And I'm like, no, I don't have an agent. And I'm like, well, we'll talk, we'll see, right? I played it all cool, we'll see. And it ended up being a book deal with a big New York publisher. At the time, I didn't be like, oh, well, this is going to be the cover of the book. I got to come up with a great... No, it was like I let myself just go and explore and tinker. And like I said, sometimes your heart knows why you have to do stuff, and your brain, it takes a while for your head to figure it out. So this Tinker Project this year for me, basically I decided I'm going to make 100 pieces of art in 2016. And I made this little chart for myself. It's a little bit outdated. I'm about to hear right now. But I'm on pace. And last year I made 29 pieces of art. So here's what I think is kind of cool. I literally don't have any plans of what am I trying to get, other than I'm literally just trying to get 100 pieces of art, and just do whatever. But I have this sort of sneaking suspicion that number 78 is the number I keep thinking of. Number 78, something cool is going to happen with number 78. But here's the thing is number 78 isn't number 2. I have to do 77 paintings and let the process explore and develop and before I get to number 78, right? Now, if 78 comes and it's kind of lame, that's okay too. I'll just be happy if I can get to 100 by the end of the year, right? So that's what a Tinker Project is just giving yourself permission to do whatever it is you wanted to do. So everybody has little cards, everyone here. Is there a download for like the people online? Okay, cool. You guys get to have a download too of this little, it's basically like sort of like a pledge card for yourself. It's a Tinker Project. So it's like, what is your Tinker Project? What do you want to do, right? And it's the idea of like, what's been that thing that's been rattling around in your brain? Now, it doesn't have to be this gigantic, I'm going to make 100 pieces of art. Crying out loud, I'm like, geez, I could have made it 50 and I would have doubled my output from last year, whatever. But it could just be something small. But write it down. It makes it much more likely that you'll actually do something with it if you write it down. Yeah, and what's cool, like, so I got a chance to do an interview the other day, and there was like a call-in show, and there was a woman who called up, and she was like, it was like the quintessential concept of this, right? So she works in healthcare with Alzheimer's patients. And she, on the side, she works with welding equipment and heavy machinery. Like, that's what she does as her, I don't even know if she would call it a hobby. It's just like something she says, I've just kind of been interested with it, and I just kind of started doing it, and I have this guy that he just tells me what to do and weld this and do that, and she goes, it's just fun. But what's cool about that is then that like kind of like recharges her for what she's doing all day long, which is giving and giving and giving, right? So again, I guess I can't stress this part enough, is that the Tinker Project, the whole point is that you don't really know what's going to come of it, other than you're giving yourself permission to go. But more times than not, something good does come of it. We just don't always know what it is until we actually get in the process of doing it. A couple last little thoughts here. If you thought this program was useful, like I said, I consider myself a professional reminderer. I'm not sure that anything I said today was brand new to you, but it might be something you haven't thought about in a long time. And so we have a newsletter that comes out once a week. I write it. It's about these sorts of things to think about, sometimes fun stuff to do. If you're interested, it's free. You can go to escapeadulthood.com and sign up for that. People here, there's these little sign-up cards, and there's a tear-off portion. You can write your name and email and just give it to me before you leave. Everyone that's here got a card, and there's 8 different pieces of art. So they're the exact, when you tear it off, it's like the exact size of a baseball card. So I used to collect baseball cards, and I'm a nerd. So you could look at it as of like wherever you sat is exactly the one you were supposed to get. Or you could say, well, I like my neighbors better, and you could trade. So either way. But if you're interested in that, go ahead and fill it out. We are also on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, Pinterest, all with Escape Adulthood. And if you sign up for the newsletter, you also get this free ebook, which is 15 of our best adultitis fighting prescriptions. Fun things to do with friends, family, coworkers, stuff like that. It's a free ebook if you sign up for the newsletter. So just the last couple quick things to leave you with. One of the things that I love the best about tinkering is it is an escape hatch for people who are overwhelmed or stressed out or lost. So maybe you're been going up a corporate ladder only to realize you're on the wrong one. Maybe you're in a relationship that has devolved to such a toxic level that you think there's no hope to redeem it. Maybe where your life is right now is nothing like you imagined when you were 18 years old. Probably most of us, right? Where's my Batmobile? Come on. But the thing is, don't panic. Don't freak out. Don't think you have to change everything tomorrow. Tinker. Take one step. It's like I said earlier, you really become overwhelmed sometimes with like all the things you could do or should do, and you're not sure what direction. And sometimes it's easy to say, I don't even know what I'm supposed to do. You actually do. You actually do. You know what your next step is. I'll bet you anything you know what the next. You may not know what the second step is, but you could think of what the first step is. But you have to be careful, because sometimes it's not very impressive. There was a a girl I talked to after one of my speaking engagements, and she wanted to be a speaker, and she said, I have this really big message to share. I just don't know what to do. Like, you say that we know our next step, but I don't know what it is. And I'm like, well, is there anywhere that you have that you could speak for free? Like at your church? She said she was part of a church. Like at your church or in the community? And she says, yeah. And I'm like, well, have you done that? No. Well, then do that. And then see what happens. Maybe you'll get feedback. Maybe someone will say, hey, speak to me or whatever. Like, but I don't know what the next step is, but I know what that one is, right? And so sometimes we think like the next step is like so unexciting, like, oh, geez, just do that. That doesn't seem big enough. Well, no, maybe not, but it's the next step, right? Sometimes Hollywood has us convinced that it's got to be this big magical thing and you put it in the microwave and it's done and it's amazing, and it just is not. Sometimes we're afraid of the next step, which again, bringing it down to that 20 seconds of embarrassing bravery, we can muster that up. We can make that cold call for 20 seconds and then be done and then go eat a cherry pie afterwards, like reward or whatever it is, right? You just need that 20 seconds. The road to amazing is paved with small, ordinary, but intentional steps. There is no magic bullet. There's no get-rich-quick scheme. There's nothing like that. It's basically the art of tinkering one step at a time. And the last thing I'll lead you with is this idea. You've heard it before. Here goes nothing, right? You'll hear it in it's like the Packers last year in the playoffs. A couple Hail Marys, right? Well, here goes nothing, and then it became something, right? It's sort of that desperation. It's probably not going to work, but what the hell? We'll go for it, right? Here's the thing: is like it's not nothing. Tinkering and trying something that might not work is never nothing. It's not. It takes a lot of courage. It takes a lot of vulnerability. It takes a lot of faith. That even, it might not work out. No, it might not work out. But even if it doesn't work out, something happened. You got better. You learned something. Your comfort zone got a little bit bigger. So my wish for you guys is the next time that you just be willing to play and experiment. And the next time you cast off into the unknown through the art of tinkering, just say to yourself, here goes something. Thank you so much for being here. God bless you guys.